Hi friends, Miki here. It's Monday again, so it's time for another singing tip of the week. Today, I want to help you find your vocal range. This is something that's very basic but very important for singers. When we talk about vocal range, we're merely talking about how low and how high we can sing. Most people have between a 1.5 octave and a 2 octave vocal range, which seems like a very small amount. It's just 12 to 16 notes. But you can sing a lot of songs with that very limited vocal range. And if you start developing your voice and taking voice lessons, most people can get to about 3 octaves. Of course, we all hear about the exceptions to the rule on the far edges of the spectrum. So there are people that have physical limitations that can cause them to have less than a 1.5 octave vocal range, and there's nothing they can do to get more than that. And then on the other side of the spectrum, there are the people that are genetically blessed and have 5, 6, 7 octave vocal ranges. Those are the Mariah Careys of the world, Whitney Houston, Renee Fleming, Celine Dion. But most people are going to be somewhere within the middle of the bell curve. You should not feel bad if you're not one of those supermodels of the vocal world. I mean, we can't all be born looking like Heidi Klum. And yeah, that's sad, but welcome to the 99% of the population that's right there with you. So you definitely shouldn't feel bad if you don't have a superhuman voice. Our voice is unique in that it's within our bodies, and so it's controlled by our physical limitations. We're using muscles, we're using the resonant cavities that's based on the shape of your face and your throat. We're using our lung capacity, and all of these things vary greatly from person to person. That's just the way that it is, biologically speaking. And so, you can't be for example, an Usain Bolt or a Michael Phelps. Michael Phelps happens to have been born with exceptionally long arms, and that's one of the things that probably contributes to him being a world record-breaking swimmer. And even if you or I spent 12 hours in the pool every day working with the greatest swimming coaches in the world and really devoting ourselves completely to swimming, we would never be able to become a Michael Phelps. However, you can do a lot with your voice, and you can develop your voice to the limits of your potential. So right now, you might be only using 1.5 octaves of your voice, but with the proper training, you can get to that 3 octave range, and that can make a huge difference. There are a lot of exercises that can help you stretch your range and really access the edges of your potential. This video is not going to focus in on those. Right now, we're just going to be really zeroing in on that discrete task of figuring out where your natural vocal range is. So what are some of the factors that affect our vocal range? Well, number one, we can think about the purpose of why and how our voice developed. We use our voice for communication, and it's co-evolved with our hearing. So we hear within a certain range, and we're not really going to be able to sing outside of that range because it wouldn't make any sense, right? We're not going to be singing up in the stratosphere where only dogs can hear, because that doesn't serve any communicative purpose. Of course, we can sing in our whistle range, which is very, very high, but it's still audible to the human ear. So most people are going to be able to sing within that communicative range that makes sense for human beings. And within the human spectrum, there's a lot of variation. So generally speaking, men are going to have lower voices than women. Of course, as with any stereotype, there's a grain of truth, and it's not always going to be the case. So there are exceptionally high-voiced men and women with exceptionally low voices, and they're kind of at the edges of the spectrum. But generally speaking, that's not going to be the case. And the reason is that men have thicker vocal cords, and the thicker your cords are, the lower your voice is going to be. Same thing is true with young people versus older people. When you're young, you have thinner vocal cords, and you have a higher voice. Then you go through puberty and your cords thicken, and there are other developmental hormonal changes that happen, and your voice drops. And that's true for both men and women, although we see it more with boys as they go through puberty and turn into men. That's why we talk about the voice changing more in relation to boys, but it happens to girls too. It's just less noticeable. It also happens when women go through pregnancy. Your voice drops when you're pregnant because of hormonal changes. And some of those changes are permanent, some are not. As you get older, your voice tends to lose notes in your range because your vocal cords atrophy like everything else in your body. So that's why it's really important to keep practicing and keeping your voice limber as you age. So if you look at like a 70-year-old marathon runner or yogi, they're in incredible shape and look like they're 30 years old because they've been using those muscles continuously, and there's never been a gap where they've allowed them to atrophy. So the same is true of our voice. Now, even within the sexes, there is a great variation between high and low. So a woman can have a very low voice or a very high voice. And if you have no clue where your vocal range is, one thing that can help you kind of zero in and pinpoint it is your speaking voice. So if you're speaking naturally and effortlessly and you're not really thinking about your vocal affectation, you're speaking in your singing range. So there are a whole host of reasons for why people might not be speaking in their natural range, but for the most part, where you're speaking is where you're going to be singing. If you are using your voice in an unnatural way, so for example, if you listen to Marilyn Monroe speaking, she had this very high, girly affectation because she thought that that's what was sexy, which apparently it was because she was very, very popular, but that was not her natural speaking voice. And, you know, in our society, I think generally speaking, women have a harder time finding their voice. That's changing, but women traditionally have been expected to be more demure, more quiet, not take a lot of space, not be loud, or you can be called a bitch, you know, if you're too assertive. And so a lot of women will speak in a more high, quiet way because that seems like the right thing to do and it's more feminine. By the opposite token, a lot of women in the workplace where they feel it's a man's world and they want to be taken more seriously might speak in a lower voice so that they have more gravitas. Conversely, some men speak in a feminine way because they want to appear more feminine, or they might speak in a really low kind of masculine voice to sound more manly. So there are circumstances where people consciously manipulate the pitch of their voice in order to come across a certain way. There are also cases where people do it unconsciously. So when we get nervous, our voices tend to go up, or if we get like angry and upset, we aren't even aware of it, but our cords tend to tense up and our voices get higher. And if we really want to be taken seriously, as I've mentioned, we might really lower our voice. So there's all sorts of reasons for why you might lose the ability to really judge where your natural voice is. But for the most part, you're going to be speaking where you're supposed to be singing. And one little test that you can do to find your natural speaking pitch is to say, uh-oh. And that second pitch where you land on the O is going to be around where your natural speaking voice is. It's very important to speak in a natural way as a singer. 90% of the time that we're using our voice during the day, we're talking. So if you're putting on a speech affectation, you're really going to fatigue your voice, and that's going to affect your singing. So you want to really speak in the most natural way possible. That was a very long preamble. Now let's get into the meat of the exercise. So I'm going to put up a diagram on the screen, and it's going to show you that the spectrum of the human voice is divided into 6 categories. Starting from the lowest pitch, it's going to go bass, baritone, tenor for the male voices generally speaking, and then it's going to go into alto, mezzo-soprano, and soprano. Now, obviously, these are very black and white buckets, and your voice may not sit comfortably within one of these. It might straddle 2 or even 3 of these categories. That's totally fine and normal, but doing this exercise is just going to be helpful to situate you somewhere within that spectrum. For example, my range goes from a B3 to a D6, but realistically speaking, I'm most comfortable in a D3 to a G5 range. Now, that can sound a little bit confusing, so let me explain what those numbers and letters mean. Those are correlated to a piano keyboard. So the lowest C on the piano is C1. An octave above that is C2, then C3, C4, middle C, C5, C6, C7, C8. So that's all that we're talking about when we're using those numbers. And of course, the letter names correspond to the notes. And we start with A, B, C, D, E, F, G, then it repeats. So I'm not going to go into all of that music theory stuff. I might do another video on that, but for now, I think that's a good enough, simple explanation. So realistically speaking, even though my range is from a B3 to a D6, I'm really most comfortable from a D3 to a G5. And that puts me a little bit below an alto and a little bit above an alto. So I'm really comfortable as an alto. I might go a little bit into mezzo soprano, but I would consider myself an alto. So now let's get into the actual exercise. So we're gonna be singing on a 5-tone scale on the vowel ah, and we're gonna start in the bass range. So we're gonna be going from E2 to C4 on the piano. And we're gonna be doing ah. I'll join in when it gets into my range, but obviously I'm not gonna start in the bass range because my voice doesn't go that low. 1, 2, ready, go. So that there was the bass vocal range. So if you felt comfortable in that range, congratulations, you are a basic bitch. No, I'm kidding. I've been wanting to make that joke this entire time. No, so that just means that you have a bass voice, and that can be very sexy. So now let's move on to a baritone range. Now we're gonna be going from G2 to E4. 1, 2, ready, go. Great. So if your voice was comfortable within that range, that means that you're a baritone. Okay, so now let's move on to tenor, which is from B2 to G4. 1, 2, ready, go. Very nice. Now let's move on to my vocal range, my vocal type, which is an alto. So we are going to be going from F3 to D5. 1, 2, ready, go. Very nice. Now we're going to move into mezzo soprano, which is from A3 to F5. 1, 2, ready, go. Very nice. Now for our final category, we're going to move into the soprano voice. So that's from C4 or middle C up to A5. 1, 2, ready, go. So there you have it. We've gone through all of the vocal ranges. Hopefully that helped you to really pinpoint where your comfortable range is. So why is this useful? Well, when you pick a song to cover and to sing, you want to pick something that's written for your vocal range, generally speaking. So if a song is written for a soprano and you're a baritone, you're going to have a really hard time singing it in its original key. That being said, if you love a song, there's no reason that you shouldn't sing it, even if it wasn't written for your vocal type. All you need to do is transpose it into a key that is more comfortable for you. So for example, let's just look at the song Hello by Adele, because everybody in the universe has heard that song. On the chorus, she's starting on an F4 and going to a B4. So it's actually, it's pretty comfortably situated within a alto vocal range. And she's belting on that, so hello from the outside. So if that's your vocal range and you're comfortable belting there, great, you don't have to do anything. But let's say that you're actually a tenor and you want to sing that song. You're going to have a really hard time belting that high grace note on B. So let's move it down 2 whole steps. So let's go down to, if we're starting on F, Let's go down to a C sharp. Hello from the other side. So that's going to be much more comfortable for you to belt if you're a tenor, if you transpose it down 2 whole steps. So that's why it's important to know these things. I would never ever tell anybody not to sing a song, even if it's written for a different vocal type. In fact, and I'll talk about this in another video, I think it's really cool when a woman covers a song that was originally written by or sung by a man, and vice versa, because generally speaking, when people cover songs, they try to pick something that's in their vocal range. And so 99% of the people that sing hello are going to sing it in the original key. But if you sing it as a soprano or as a bass, it's going to sound really different than everybody else's version, and that's going to give it a really interesting and unique take. There's so much more that I could say about this topic, but I want to keep this video not super long, so I'm going to stop here. I hope that this was helpful. If you have any questions at all about your vocal range, please leave them below in the comments and I will get back to you. And please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video and find it helpful. And of course, come back next week. I'll have some more content for you. And until then, happy singing.